Welcome to the Hollow Files, where the forgotten, the cursed, and the unspeakable are brought back into the light. Tonight we open another case from the shadows. The wind howls through the rugged expanse of Sierra County, California. The year is 1992, and a fiery autumn has swept through the forests, painting the landscape in shades of gold and copper. Towering mountains, ancient and unforgiving, rise in the distance like silent watchers of a forgotten age. On the horizon, storm clouds gather, promising the first bitter chill of the coming winter. Hidden among these dense woods and jagged peaks is the small town of Pine Rest, a community of just under 2,000 souls. It's the kind of place where neighbors know one another's business, and where, so they believe, no secrets can remain buried for long. The town's heart is a small collection of Main Street storefronts, a general store owned by the same family for 3 generations, a diner with coffee that's always hot but never delicious, a hardware shop, a small library, and a post office that serves as the town's social center. On October 7th, 1992, Pine Rest buzzes with the excitement of its annual Harvest Festival. Residents hang festive orange and brown decorations from lampposts and assemble wooden stalls in the town square. The air is thick with the sweet scents of cinnamon and spiced apples. Mrs. Henderson, a 6-time champion of the town's pie contest, guards her secret recipe with the intensity of a national secret. Mr. Wilson engages in a heated debate with the mayor about the precise placement of hay bales for the children's maze. The laughter of children echoes as they chase each other through rustling piles of fallen leaves, their breath puffing into small clouds in the cooling air. A sense of peace, of normalcy hangs over the town. But peace, as they say, is a fleeting thing. Meet the Kellers, John, Sarah, and their 10-year-old son, Ethan. They moved to Pine Rest from the bustling city of San Francisco only 6 months prior, seeking the tranquility, the clean air, and the security of a small-town life. Their 2-story home on Oakwood Lane still holds the remnants of their move, unopened boxes in the garage and unhung pictures on the walls, giving the house an air of impermanence despite their desire to settle down. John works as a high school science teacher. His hands-on experiments and infectious enthusiasm quickly earned him a reputation among students. Sarah, a graphic designer, works remotely. Her bizarre electronic screech of her dial-up modem has become a source of neighborhood fascination. And then there was Ethan, a quiet, contemplative boy with a unique perspective on the world. He was the kind of child who preferred reading over sports and would spend hours in the woods behind their house, collecting strange rocks, leaves, and other curiosities that he couldn't quite identify. While other kids his age were obsessed with video games and trading cards, Ethan meticulously filled notebooks with detailed drawings of flora, fauna, and geological formations, showing a skill far beyond his years. His 4th-grade teacher, Miss Parker, had already suggested that he might be a gifted student and recommended advanced placement tests, a suggestion John and Sarah were still considering. Ethan was always bringing home these odd things, Sarah would later recount to investigators, her fingers nervously twisting her wedding band. Strange rocks with patterns that looked almost like writing, pieces of wood twisted into impossible shapes. Once, a small metal object that didn't look like anything I'd ever seen. When asked where he found them, Ethan would simply smile and say, "The forest gives them to me." At the time, Sarah dismissed it as a child's imagination, an innocent way of personifying nature. In the aftermath, she would be haunted by the thought that her son had been trying to warn her all along. October 8th, a typical Thursday morning. The Kellers' morning routine unfolds with familiar predictability. John reviews his lesson plans at the kitchen table. Sarah packs lunches. Ethan feeds their aging tabby cat, Rocket. The radio murmurs in the background with news about Bill Clinton's presidential campaign and forecasts of economic recovery. Ethan leaves for school wearing his favorite red and black flannel shirt and clutching his Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles lunchbox, the one with Donatello on the front, because, as Ethan had explained, he's the smart one. Sarah waves goodbye from the porch, watching as her son disappears down the tree-lined street, golden leaves swirling around his feet. It would be the last time she saw him as the boy she knew. At Pine Rest Elementary, Miss Parker's fourth grade class begins. As she calls out names, each student responds, except one. Ethan Keller? A heavy silence. Ethan Keller? Miss Parker marks him absent, assuming he's sick, as children often are with the changing weather. Ethan Keller was marked absent from first period, Principal Morris would later recount, his face somber, his voice heavy with the grim weight of hindsight. We all assumed he was at home sick. It wasn't until Miss Parker called the Keller residence to ask about a missed assignment that we realized no one knew where he was. The call reaches the Keller home at 2:15 p.m. Sarah, engrossed in a design project, is about to let the answering machine pick up. A sudden, unexplainable urge makes her answer on the third ring. Mrs. Keller, this is Miss Parker from Pine Rest Elementary. Is Ethan feeling any better? The words don't immediately register. Better? I'm sorry, what do you mean? He wasn't in class today. I assumed he was homesick. A moment of chilling silence, the first tremor of fear. Miss Parker, I put Ethan on the school bus this morning. He should be there. The next hour spirals into a frantic blur of phone calls. The school bus driver insists he never saw Ethan board that morning. Neighbors are questioned. Friends' parents are called. No one has seen the boy. Sarah calls John at the high school, her voice cracking as she explains the situation. He abandons his class mid-lesson and races home, his tires squealing around every turn. By 4 p.m., every resident of Pine Rest knows Ethan is missing. The news spreads from the school to the grocery store, from the diner to the lumber mill, and to the outlying farms. In a community this small, a missing child is everyone's child. By 5 p.m., search parties are combing the woods and streets, calling out his name. Flashlights cut through the deepening dusk as volunteers spread out between the Keller home and the elementary school, searching every possible hiding place, every ditch, and every clump of trees. By nightfall, a cold, heavy dread has settled over the town, a sickening feeling in the pit of every parent's stomach. In a town like this, kids don't just disappear, Sheriff Carson tells the assembled volunteers, his weathered face set in a mask of determination. He's been the Sierra County Sheriff for 15 years, handling everything from bar fights to the occasional marijuana farm, but nothing like this. Never a child vanishing in broad daylight. They wander off. They lose track of time, but they come home. They always come home. But Ethan does not come home. Not that night or the next. The search intensifies. State police are called in. Dogs from a Sacramento canine unit are brought in, their handlers guiding them along the path Ethan should have taken to school, letting them sniff a piece of clothing from his hamper. Helicopters from the county sheriff's department sweep the forest with thermal imaging cameras, searching for any sign of human heat among the trees. Flyers bearing Ethan's face, round cheeks, serious eyes, and a small scar above his right eyebrow from a bike accident the previous summer, appear on every telephone pole, in every shop window, and on every business counter in a 30-mile radius. The local newspaper runs a front-page story. A television station in Sacramento sends a reporter and camera crew. Sarah Keller sits at her kitchen table, a mug of cold coffee clutched in her hands, her gaze fixed on nothing. Friends and neighbors fill the house, bringing casseroles that no one can eat and offering platitudes no one believes. John hasn't slept in 48 hours, his voice growing hoarse from calling his son's name into the unyielding forest. His eyes are bloodshot and haunted, and a day's worth of stubble darkens his jaw. The first 48 hours are crucial in a missing persons case. Detective Rivera of the state police tells them, his voice gentle but professional. He has handled dozens of missing children cases in his career, some ending well, but many not. After that, the chances of finding them, well, they decrease significantly. But we're not giving up. This was a child. This was Ethan. On day 3, a break in the case. Tommy Winters, Ethan's classmate, comes forward. His parents bring him to the sheriff's station, the boy trembling, his eyes red from crying. He had been too scared to speak up until his guilt became unbearable. We were playing, just playing, in the old mining area. Ethan said he found something cool and I should come see it, but I was scared. There are signs everywhere saying to stay out. My dad says those old mines could collapse any minute. I told Ethan I wouldn't go, and he called me a baby, so I left him there. I left him there alone. The old Pine Rest mine, abandoned in the 1970s after a collapse killed 3 workers, had made national news for a short time. 3 men buried alive. Rescue attempts continued for days before the operation was finally deemed hopeless. The mine had been officially sealed off, but locals knew of other ways in. Gaps in the fencing, holes just big enough for a curious child to slip through. The no trespassing signs and danger warnings served as an irresistible lure to adventurous boys. When Tommy told us about the mine, my heart sank, Sheriff Carson would later admit, the memory still making his face pale years later. Those tunnels go for miles under the mountains. If a kid got lost in there, or worse, if there was another collapse. The search shifts to the mine. Rescue workers in hard hats and headlamps venture into the mountain's dark mouth. The entrance they find is a small gap in the chain-link fence surrounding the old site, a hole in the boards covering what was once a ventilation shaft. It is small enough that the adults have to remove their equipment to squeeze through, but more than large enough for a 10-year-old boy. John Keller has to be physically restrained from going in with them. 2 deputies hold him back as he struggles, his face contorted with desperation. "That's my son in there, my boy. I have to find him. Let me go." Sarah stands nearby, silent tears streaming down her face, one hand pressed against her mouth as if to hold back screams. Inside the mine, the rescue team finds undeniable evidence. A small footprint in the mud, a candy wrapper from Ethan's favorite chocolate bar, a thread matching his flannel shirt caught on a ragged rock. The signs lead them deeper into the mountain, through narrow passages where support beams sag ominously, past rusted equipment abandoned decades ago. Their headlamps cut through a darkness so profound it seems to absorb light itself. And then, something more chilling. Signs of a recent collapse. A section of the tunnel where the ceiling had given way, burying the path under tons of rock and earth. The debris is fresh. No dust has settled on the newly exposed surfaces. No spiderwebs span the newly exposed surfaces. It happened recently, perhaps within the last few days, a rescue worker would later recall, his voice lowered, as if still afraid of speaking the fear into existence. When we saw that collapse, well, none of us wanted to say it out loud, but we were all thinking the same thing. If the kid was on the other side when it came down. On day 5, the mood in Pine Rest shifts from frantic hope to grim resignation. Engineers brought in from Sacramento determined that clearing the collapse would likely cause further cave-ins. The surrounding rock is dangerously unstable. The risk to the rescue workers is too great. The town gathers in the high school gymnasium. Folding chairs are arranged in neat rows, and the air is thick with the scent of floor wax and the low murmur of hushed voices.
Mayor Wilson stands at the podium, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by somber gravity. "I know this isn't what any of us want to hear," he says, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "But the experts are telling us that continuing to dig could cost more lives. We have to accept the possibility that Ethan is gone." A murmur of denial ripples through the crowd. Someone sobs loudly. In the front row, John Keller stares blankly ahead, his face utterly empty, as if he has retreated to a place deep within himself. Beside him, Sarah rises slowly, deliberately. All eyes turn to her as she walks to the podium. Mayor Wilson steps aside, ceding the microphone to her with a gesture of deference to her grief. Sarah grips the edges of the podium, saying nothing for a long moment as she surveys the faces before her. When she finally speaks, her voice is low, fierce, and electric with emotion. "My son is not gone," she says, her words building in volume and intensity until she is nearly shouting. "He's not gone until I see him, until I hold him. You can stop looking, but I won't. I will never stop looking for my child." Her words electrify the room. People rise to their feet, applauding and calling out in agreement. Mayor Wilson looks uncomfortable, caught between compassion and practicality. Sheriff Carson watches from the side of the stage, his face troubled. He understands what the engineers have told him, knows the danger, but he also knows what it means to be a parent, to never give up. Moved by Sarah's plea, a group of retired miners who once worked the Pine Rest seam volunteered to attempt a dangerous rescue. They gather in the back of the gym, a circle of weathered faces, calloused hands, and eyes that have seen a darkness most cannot imagine. "We know those tunnels better than we know our own homes," says Frank Guthrie, 72 years old, who spent 30 years beneath the mountain before the mine closed. "If there's a way to reach that boy, we'll find it." Against the advice of the engineers and the orders of the sheriff, they gather their old equipment, dust off their hard hats, and head for the mountain. The next morning finds them at the mine entrance before dawn, their headlamps cutting through the pre-morning gloom, their breath fogging in the cold air. "You don't have my permission to do this," Sheriff Carson tells them, standing at the fence line with his arms crossed. But he makes no move to stop them. Instead, he adds, "Be careful in there, and find him if you can." The 6 old miners, with a combined experience of over a century underground, enter the mine. They move with the confidence of men who know the earth intimately, who have learned to read its moods, its warnings, and its dangers. They reach the collapse by mid-morning and begin the delicate work of clearing a path. Their progress is agonizingly slow, measured in inches rather than feet. Each rock must be removed carefully, the surrounding structure constantly monitored for signs of instability. They work in shifts, 2 men digging while the others rest, no one staying at the rock face for more than 30 minutes at a time. Outside the mine, a vigil forms. People from town bring food, coffee, and blankets against the increasing cold. As the day progresses, more gather. By afternoon, there are dozens. By evening, hundreds. They set up camp with tents, folding chairs, and portable heaters. As darkness falls, candles are lit, their flames wavering in the gentle breeze. People pray, sing hymns, and hold each other. Pastor Williams from the small Methodist church on Elm Street leads an impromptu service. "We ask for your mercy, Lord," he intones, his head bowed, his hands clasped. "For your protection over young Ethan, for a miracle in this time of need." Sarah Keller and John Keller stand at the edge of the crowd, their hands tightly intertwined, watching the mine entrance as if their sheer will could pierce the mountain and reveal their son. On day 7, the miners have been working around the clock, taking short breaks for food and rest, but otherwise making steady progress through the collapsed section. Reports from inside are cautiously optimistic. The surrounding rock seems stable. The debris is being cleared without triggering further falls. And then a setback. Another collapse, smaller but just as dangerous. The sound of it echoes through the tunnels, followed by shouts and the frantic beams of headlamps. When the dust settles, 2 of the volunteer miners are injured. Jim Pearson with a broken arm and Hank Miller with deep lacerations to his face and chest.
They are pulled out on makeshift stretchers and loaded into waiting ambulances. "It just came down without warning," Pearson tells Sheriff Carson as paramedics set his arm. "One minute we were making good progress. The next it was like the mountain itself was fighting us." County officials who have been monitoring the situation with growing unease step in. The state mining inspector, called in from Nevada City, examines the site and declares it too unstable for continued operations. Despite protests from the remaining miners, despite the pleas of the Kellers, the rescue attempt is officially terminated. Sheriff Carson, his face lined with the weight of the decision, addresses the gathered crowd. The sun sets behind him, casting long shadows across the cleared area in front of the mine entrance. His uniform is dusty, and his eyes are red from lack of sleep. "I want to find this boy as much as anyone," he says, his voice rough with emotion. "I have a son his age. I understand what the Kellers are going through, but I can't let more people get hurt or killed. As of now, I'm ordering the mine sealed. We're shifting to a recovery operation rather than a rescue." The words land like physical blows. Recovery operation. The euphemism is not lost on anyone. They are no longer looking for a living child, but a body, a memorial rather than a reunion. The crowd erupts in angry shouts, protests, and tears. Sarah Keller collapses and would have fallen if John hadn't caught her. Her primal scream of denial cuts through the cacophony. The Kellers refuse to leave their home, refuse to accept condolences, and refuse to give up hope. Sarah sits by the phone waiting for a call that will not come. John continues to research the mine, the mountain, looking for another way in, another chance. In town, rumors begin to spread, whispers about the mine, about its history. Old, half-forgotten legends passed down from the days when the first settlers came to the area and encountered the native Miwok who had warned them about the mountain. Elderly residents speak in hushed tones over coffee at the diner. Margaret Wilson, 93 years old, whose grandfather was among the first to mine the mountain, shares tales she heard as a child. "It's not the first time that mine has taken someone," she says, her gnarled hands wrapped around a mug of tea. "My grandfather used to tell stories about how sometimes the mountain keeps what it takes, but sometimes, rarely, it gives back." On day 10, Pine Rest attempts to return to some semblance of normalcy, though a pall hangs over the town. The search for Ethan continues, but has been scaled back significantly. Volunteer teams still comb the forest, clinging to the hope that perhaps he wasn't in the mine after all, that he wandered out, became lost in the woods, and is still out there somewhere. The media presence, which had peaked in the days after Tommy's revelation, has dwindled to a single reporter from the Sacramento Bee, filing increasingly brief updates. The story is fading from public consciousness, as tragedies always do for those not directly affected. At the Keller house, Sarah sits in Ethan's room, surrounded by his belongings, his comic books, his Nintendo games, the strange objects he gathered from the forest, arranged carefully on his shelves. She touches each item, as if trying to absorb some essence of her son through his possessions. "I can feel him," she tells her sister, who has come from Oregon to be with her. "I know that sounds crazy, but I can. He's still here somehow, still alive." Meanwhile, John Keller has been spending his days at the library, researching the history of the mine, the mountain, and the land itself. He pores over old newspapers on microfiche, town records, and geological surveys, anything that might offer a clue, a new approach, a reason to hope. "There has to be something," he mutters, his bloodshot eyes scanning yellowed pages. "Some other entrance, some connection to another tunnel system, something we're missing." He finds it. Buried in a mining report from 1943 is a reference to a natural cave system that intersects with the man-made tunnels.
a system that, according to the report, was sealed off due to unusual and potentially hazardous conditions. "What does that mean?" John asks the librarian, pointing to the phrase. "Why would they seal it, and could it provide another way to reach where Ethan might be?" The librarian, Mrs. Hoffman, adjusts her glasses and peers at the document. "I'm not sure. That report is from during the war years, when they were mining strategic materials. A lot of the records from that time are still classified or incomplete." She taps a finger on the phrase. "But I've heard stories from my father. He worked in the administrative offices at the mine in the 50s. He mentioned once that there were parts of the mountain they were told never to enter. Places where the instruments would malfunction, where compass needles would spin wildly. He thought it was electromagnetic disturbances from mineral deposits, but some of the miners had other theories." John takes his findings to Sheriff Carson, who initially dismisses the idea. "We've had experts crawling all over that mountain for days. If there was another way in, they would have found it." But John was persistent, pushing the weathered document across the sheriff's desk, pointing out the specific coordinates mentioned in the report. "This location isn't anywhere near where they've been searching. It's on the north face, almost half a mile from the main entrance." Sheriff Carson rubs his eyes, exhaustion evident in every line of his face. He hasn't slept properly in days, the weight of the failed rescue operation heavy on his conscience. "Even if this cave exists, even if it connects to the main tunnels, the chances that your son—" "I know the chances. I'm a science teacher. I understand probability. But right now, any chance is better than none." The sheriff studies John's face for a long moment, then nods slowly. "All right, I'll check it out. But John, don't get your hopes up. It's been 10 days. Just check it out, please," John says. A small team, the sheriff, 2 deputies, and John, heads to the location indicated in the old report. The spot is half a mile from the main mine entrance, higher up the mountain, where the forest grows dense and the terrain becomes steep and rocky. They park the sheriff's Bronco where the fire road ends and continue on foot, pushing through underbrush and climbing over fallen logs, following the coordinates on a GPS unit that occasionally loses signal under the thick canopy. "I thought we were on a wild goose chase," Sheriff Carson would later recall, still shaking his head at the memory, "following some vague report from 50 years ago. But then we found it. A small opening in the rock face, partially hidden by vegetation, just large enough for a man to squeeze through. The entrance is almost invisible unless you're standing right in front of it, a narrow fissure in the granite, obscured by a tangle of manzanita bushes and young pines. The deputies clear away the vegetation with machetes, revealing the dark opening beyond. "I'm going in," John says immediately, already pulling a flashlight from his backpack. Sheriff Carson puts a restraining hand on his shoulder. "No, you're not. We have no idea what's in there or if it's stable. Davis and I will go first." He nods to one of his deputies. "Miller, you stay here with Mr. Keller. Radio for backup. Tell them our location and have them bring proper caving equipment." Before John can protest, the sheriff and Deputy Davis are squeezing through the opening, their flashlight beams disappearing into the darkness. John paces anxiously while Deputy Miller makes the radio call, his eyes never leaving the cave entrance, as if expecting his son to emerge at any moment. Inside the cave, Sheriff Carson and Deputy Davis find themselves in a tight, winding passage that slopes steeply downward. The air grows colder and damper as they descend. Their flashlight beams cut through a darkness that feels almost solid, revealing limestone formations, stalactites and stalagmites that have formed over thousands of years. The floor is slick with moisture, forcing them to move carefully, testing each step. "It felt wrong in there," Deputy Davis would later tell investigators, visibly uncomfortable with the memory. "Like the darkness was pushing back against our lights, like we weren't supposed to be there." They push deeper into the earth, following the natural tunnel that twists and turns, occasionally so narrow they have to turn sideways to squeeze through. The passage seems to go on forever, taking them deep into the mountain.
Sheriff Carson marks his path with fluorescent tape, ensuring they can find their way back.
After what feels like hours but is closer to 40 minutes, they notice a change in the tunnel. The natural limestone gives way to worked stone, clear signs of human activity. Pick marks scar the walls. Rotting support beams appear at regular intervals. They have reached the old mine. And then, a breakthrough. They find markings on the wall. Recent markings. A child's handprint in the mud. Small, distinct, unmistakable. Ethan, Sheriff Carson breathes, studying the impression. Ethan was here. Deputy Davis points his flashlight farther down the tunnel. But how did he get past the collapse? The main tunnel was completely blocked. This must connect to a different part of the mine system, the sheriff says, one that bypasses the collapsed section. Renewed hope drives them forward, deeper into the mountain. The man-made tunnel eventually opens into a larger chamber, clearly part of the old mining operation. Rusted rail tracks run along the floor, disappearing into tunnels that branch off in multiple directions. Ancient mining carts sit abandoned, their metal sides corroded, their wheels frozen with age. "We need to split up," Deputy Davis suggests, pointing to the different passages. "No," Sheriff Carson says firmly. "That's how people get lost down here. We stick together, try one tunnel at a time." They choose the largest passage, the one where the rail tracks continue. As they move forward, they begin calling out, their voices echoing back at them from the stone walls. "Ethan! Ethan Keller, can you hear us?" The sound seems to go on forever, bouncing off the walls, coming back distorted. And then they hear something. Not an echo, but a response. A voice, weak but unmistakable. A child's voice calling back to them. "Hello? Is someone there? Help me!" They rush forward, following the sound, their hearts pounding. The tunnel curves sharply, then opens into another chamber, smaller than the first. Their flashlight beams swing wildly around the space, illuminating more abandoned equipment, fallen rocks, and years of accumulated debris. And there, in the far corner, they find him. Ethan Keller. He is alive. The boy is sitting with his back against the wall, his knees drawn up to his chest. He's thin, filthy, his clothes torn and dirt-streaked, but his eyes are open, alert, tracking their movements as they approach. There is no sign of serious injury, no blood, no obvious broken bones, just a child who looks tired, hungry, and very, very small in the vast darkness of the mine. "Ethan," Sheriff Carson says softly, approaching slowly, as if the boy might vanish if he moved too quickly. "Ethan, we're here to take you home." The boy stares at them, blinking in the light of their flashlights. "I knew someone would come eventually. They told me to wait here." "Who told you?" Deputy Davis asked, already shrugging off his jacket to wrap around the boy's shoulders. But Ethan doesn't answer. He just smiles, a strange, knowing expression that doesn't belong on a child's face. "I've been in law enforcement for 27 years, Sheriff Carson would later tell reporters, still visibly shaken by the experience. "I've seen a lot of things I can't explain, but this tops them all." The boy was lying on the ground, conscious, looking up at us, thin, dirty, but alive. After 13 days in that mine, with no food, no water that we could see, he was alive. The rescue makes national news. "Miracle in the mountain," the headlines read. "Boy survived 13 days buried alive." Reporters descend on Pine Rest. Cameras flash. Satellite trucks clog the narrow streets. CNN, NBC, ABC, all the major networks send crews. Pine Rest, the tiny town that most Americans couldn't find on a map, is suddenly the center of the media universe. The morning shows lead with the story. Katie Couric on Today, Joan London on Good Morning America. Their voices filled with wonder as they report on the miracle child of California. In an incredible story of survival, 10-year-old Ethan Keller was found alive today after spending nearly 2 weeks trapped in an abandoned mine. An NBC anchor intones over footage of Ethan being carried from the cave entrance on a stretcher, his parents walking alongside, tears streaming down their faces. At the hospital in Sacramento, Ethan is treated for dehydration, malnutrition, and exposure. But remarkably, his condition is far better than anyone would expect. The doctors are baffled. Test after test shows results that defy medical understanding. Medically speaking, this shouldn't be possible, Dr. Anita Patel tells the Kellers as they sit in her office, clutching each other's hands, still processing the miracle of their son's return. The human body, especially a child's, cannot survive for 13 days without water. Yet Ethan's kidney function is normal. His electrolyte levels are only slightly imbalanced. It's as if he wasn't without sustenance for nearly as long as we know he was. The media clamors for explanations. Theories abound. Perhaps there was a water source in the mine. Perhaps Ethan had food with him. Perhaps he fell into some kind of hibernation-like state due to the cold temperatures. Scientists and medical experts appear on television to offer increasingly elaborate hypotheses. A researcher from Stanford suggests that certain caves contain mineral-rich moisture that can be absorbed through the skin. A survival expert from Boulder speculates that Ethan might have consumed cave insects or fungi. The boy himself says little, responding to questions with short, sometimes cryptic answers. When allowed into his hospital room, reporters find a quiet, composed child who seems untroubled by his ordeal. "Ethan, how did you survive for so long in the mine?" a reporter from the Los Angeles Times asks, leaning forward eagerly, pen poised above his notebook. Ethan looks at him with those serious eyes, which now somehow appear older than they were 2 weeks ago. "I wasn't alone," he says softly. The reporter's pen stills. "Who was with you? Did someone else fall into the mine?" But Ethan just smiles and turns to look out the window, effectively ending the interview. The Kellers shield their son from the media frenzy, refusing further interviews after the first day. John stands guard at the hospital room door, turning away persistent reporters with increasingly firm refusals.
Firm rejections. Sarah rarely leaves Ethan's side, sleeping in the uncomfortable recliner next to his bed, holding his hand even while he sleeps. Ethan returns home after 4 days in the hospital, physically recovered but changed in ways that are difficult to articulate. The doctors can find no lasting physical effects from his ordeal, no damage to his organs from dehydration, no malnutrition, not even the muscle atrophy that should be present after such a long period of immobility. Physically, he's the same boy who disappeared 13 days ago, but in other ways, he's profoundly different. "He's quieter now," Sarah tells her sister over the phone, watching through the kitchen window as Ethan sits motionless on the back porch swing. "He just stares toward the mountains for hours. Sometimes I catch him whispering to himself, or not to himself. When I ask who he's talking to, he just smiles, that same smile he used to have when he'd bring home those strange objects from the forest." As the weeks pass, life in Pine Rest slowly returns to normal. The reporters leave, finding newer tragedies, fresher human interest stories to pursue. The satellite trucks disappear from the town square. The story fades from the national consciousness, replaced by election coverage, the Barcelona Olympics, and news of a royal separation in Britain. But in the small mountain town, questions and whispers linger. Ethan returns to school in November, a month after his rescue. His classmates treat him with a mixture of awe and unease. He's a celebrity of sorts, but also somehow different. He doesn't talk about his experience and doesn't join in their games. During recess, he sits alone, drawing in a notebook with intense concentration. His drawings were unusual, Miss Parker confides to a colleague in the teacher's lounge, her voice lowered. Complex geometric patterns, symbols I didn't recognize. When I asked what they meant, he said they were messages, When I asked from whom, he just pointed to the mountains and said, "From them." The Kellers notice other changes in their son. His interest in his old hobbies, video games, comic books, has waned. Instead, he spends hours reading books on geology, archaeology, and ancient civilizations, books far beyond the reading level of a typical 10-year-old. It's like he came back with knowledge he didn't have before, John tells Sarah late one night, their voices hushed in their bedroom, mindful of Ethan sleeping, or perhaps not sleeping, down the hall. Words, concepts he shouldn't know. Yesterday, he was talking about quantum entanglement. I teach high school science, and I barely understand that concept. Sarah nods, twisting her wedding ring anxiously. Last week, he was writing something in his notebook. It didn't look like English or any language I recognized. When I asked what it was, he said it was the old writing, said it was how they communicate. And then there are the nightmares. Ethan wakes up screaming 3 or 4 times a week. The sound sends his parents running to his room, where they find him sitting upright in bed, eyes wide open but seemingly unseeing, speaking words they don't understand, describing visions of lights in the darkness, of voices in the rock, of time stretching and bending. The worst was when he said, "They're still calling me. They want me to come back." That's when we decided to get professional help. Dr. Eleanor Matthews, a child psychologist from Sacramento, specializing in trauma and PTSD, begins sessions with Ethan in December. Her office is cheerful, designed to put children at ease, but Ethan shows no interest in the carefully selected therapeutic play items. He sits quietly in the oversized armchair, watching Dr. Matthews with unnerving intensity. At first he is resistant, answering her questions with monosyllables, refusing to discuss what happened in the mine. When she asks directly about his experience, he closes down completely, staring silently out the window until the session ends. Trauma manifests in many ways, especially in children, Dr. Matthews explains to the Kellers after the third unproductive session. Ethan's behavior, the nightmares, the withdrawal, the fixation on certain subjects, is consistent with post-traumatic stress. But there's something else there too, something I can't quite put my finger on. In their 4th session, a breakthrough. Dr. Matthews tries a different approach, giving Ethan paper and colored pencils, asking him to draw whatever comes to mind. He stares at the blank page for a long moment, then begins to draw with rapid, precise movements. First the tunnel, the collapse, the darkness, all rendered with a skill that surprises the psychologist. And then something else. Figures, tall and thin, with elongated limbs and featureless faces, dozens of them surrounding a small figure that represents Ethan. When I asked who they were, she would later write in her case notes, he looked at me as if I should already know. The Watchers, he said. They've always been there, in the deep places, waiting. She suggests that Ethan has created these figures as a coping mechanism, personifications of his fear and isolation during his ordeal. But she's troubled by the conviction in his voice, the details he provides about the Watchers, their movements, their sounds, the way they communicated with him without speaking. He told me they gave me water that wasn't water, and food that wasn't food, that they showed me things, the past, the future, worlds beyond our own, that time moved differently in their presence. A day up here is like an hour down there, she said. The psychologist recommends increasing the frequency of Ethan's sessions and suggests the possibility of medication to help with his nightmares. Perhaps, she suggests delicately, he should be evaluated by a psychiatrist as well. The words childhood onset schizophrenia and delusional disorder hover unspoken in the air. The Kellers agree to the increased sessions, desperate to help their son return to some semblance of normalcy, but they resist the suggestion of psychiatric medication. He's not crazy, John insists. Something happened to him in that mine, something real.
Meanwhile, John continues his research into the history of the mine, the mountain, and the land itself. His search expands beyond the local library to county records, state archives, even reaching out to the Bureau of Mines in Washington, D.C. What he discovers disturbs him deeply, a pattern he can no longer dismiss as coincidence. Old newspaper articles about other disappearances over the years, hikers, hunters, even other children. Some were never found. Some were discovered days or weeks later, unable or unwilling to explain where they had been. He copies the articles, arranges them chronologically, and creates a timeline that stretches back to the earliest days of settlement in the area. Local man found after 2-week disappearance, claims no memory of incident. John reads aloud from a yellowed newspaper dated 1967. Hunter discovered in abandoned mine shaft, suffers from delusions. Child missing in woods, returns home, speaks of people in the mountain. And older records from the early days of the settlement. Reports from the first miners describing strange phenomena in certain parts of the mountain. Compass needles spinning wildly, unexplained lights, sounds with no source. Warnings from the native Miwok people about the mountain, about the caves, places where, according to their legends, the boundary between worlds was thin. Places where those who watch from the shadows could reach through. John takes his findings to Sheriff Carson, who listens with growing unease. The sheriff admits that in the days following Ethan's rescue, his deputies conducted a thorough search of the chamber where the boy was found. There was no water source, Carson tells John, his voice low, as if afraid of being overheard even in his own office. No food. No way he could have survived there for 13 days. And something else. The chamber was wrong. The dimensions didn't make sense. When we measured it from the inside and then tried to correlate that with our surface measurements, the numbers didn't add up. It was like there was more space in there than there should have been. January 1993. Ethan's nightmares have lessened with medication, but his behavior continues to concern his parents and teachers. He sleepwalks, often found at the back door trying to leave the house in the middle of the night. His drawings become more elaborate, more disturbing. Vast underground chambers filled with the tall, thin figures. Structures that resemble temples or machines, covered in the same geometric patterns he's been obsessively recreating. In class, he would just stop sometimes, mid-sentence, mid-action, like he was listening to something none of the rest of us could hear. Then he'd start writing frantically, those same symbols over and over. Dr. Matthews suggests that Ethan's traumatic experience has triggered a form of schizophrenia or another psychotic disorder. She recommends more aggressive treatment, possibly including hospitalization at a facility equipped to handle such cases. The Kellers are torn. They want to help their son, but are reluctant to send him away. And part of them, a part they're afraid to acknowledge even to each other, wonders if Ethan might not be hallucinating after all. There are things we haven't told anyone, Sarah confesses to Dr. Matthews during a private consultation. Things we've seen. Objects appearing in the house that weren't there before. Those same strange rocks and twisted pieces of wood that Ethan used to collect. But we haven't let him out of our sight, haven't let him near the forest. And the temperature in his room, it drops sometimes. So cold you can see your breath. And there are sounds, whispers coming from the walls. John installs a video camera in Ethan's room, hoping to document his sleepwalking episodes and perhaps catch him bringing these objects into the house. What he captures instead defies explanation. The footage, dated January 17, 1993, shows Ethan sleeping. At 2:37 a.m., the temperature in the room visibly drops. Frost forms on the window. Ethan's breath becomes visible, and then shadows move. Not cast by anything visible in the room, they slide across the walls, the ceiling, the floor, gathering around Ethan's bed. They take shapes that are almost human, but wrong. Too tall,
too thin, limbs at impossible angles. The shadows remain for exactly 13 minutes. When they recede, there's something new on Ethan's bedside table. A small geometric object made of a material that gleams like metal, but isn't any metal John recognizes. John shows the tape to Sheriff Carson, who watches in stunned silence. The sheriff, a practical man not given to flights of fancy, struggles to process what he's seeing. He says, finally, rewinding the tape to watch the sequence again, "I've seen the tricks shadows can play, the way the mind can interpret random patterns as meaningful. But this, I couldn't explain this away. And that object, I held it in my hand. It was cold, colder than anything should be at room temperature. And it hummed. Not a sound you could hear, but a vibration you could feel, like it was alive somehow." The Kellers make a difficult decision. They will move. Leave Pine Rest, leave California altogether, start fresh, somewhere far from the mountain, the mine, the memories. They put their house on the market and begin making arrangements. Ethan reacts with unexpected calm when they tell him of their plans. "It doesn't matter where we go," he says, his voice unnervingly serene. "They can find me anywhere now. They're part of me, and I'm part of them." February 14th, 1993. The Kellers' last night in Pine Rest. Their belongings are packed. The moving truck is scheduled for the morning. They'll drive to Oregon to Sarah's sister's house while they look for a permanent place to settle. That night, a snowstorm hits the Sierra Nevada. Heavy, wet snow blocks roads and downs power lines. The Kellers lose electricity around midnight. John lights candles, stokes the fire in the fireplace. Ethan goes to bed early, exhausted from the day's preparations. Sarah checks on him every hour, watching him sleep, reassuring herself that tomorrow they'll leave this place and its dark influence behind. At 2:37 a.m., the same time the shadows had appeared on the video, Sarah goes to check on Ethan once more. His bed is empty. The house is searched top to bottom. The doors are still locked, the fresh snow outside undisturbed. Ethan has vanished from a sealed house in the middle of a snowstorm.
John calls Sheriff Carson, who arrives within minutes despite the treacherous roads. The search begins again. The house, the yard, the neighborhood. But deep down, they all know where Ethan has gone.
"I've never driven so fast in those conditions," Sheriff Carson would later recall. "The road to the mine was barely passable, but somehow we made it. And there in the snow, a single set of small footprints leading straight to the cave entrance we'd found back in October. The cave entrance is open, though they had sealed it after Ethan's rescue. The footprints lead directly inside. John and the sheriff follow them, calling Ethan's name, their voices swallowed by the darkness. The tunnel seems different, wider, smoother, the air warmer than it should be in February. The footprints continue, clear in the soft earth of the cave floor, leading them deeper than they had gone before. The tunnels, they weren't the same, Sheriff Carson would insist years later, when most had dismissed his account as the product of stress and confusion. I'd been down there enough during this search and rescue to know the layout, but now, passages that should have ended continued on. Turns that should have led to dead ends opened into new chambers. It was like the mountain itself had rearranged its insides. They find Ethan in a vast chamber they have never seen before, a space so large their flashlights can't illuminate the ceiling or far walls. In the center stands the boy, surrounded by dozens of tall, thin figures, exactly like those in his drawings. Figures that seem to be made of shadow and light simultaneously, shifting, flowing, their movements liquid and graceful. Ethan was talking to them, John would later tell investigators, his voice barely above a horrified whisper. Not in English, not in any language I've ever heard, and they were responding, not with sounds, but with lights that pulsed across their bodies, patterns that matched the symbols Ethan had been drawing. John calls to his son. Ethan turns, sees his father, and smiles. But it's not the smile of a 10-year-old boy. It's ancient, knowing, serene. "It's okay, Dad," he says, his voice echoing strangely in the vast chamber. "I understand now. I know why they saved me, why they kept me alive those 13 days. I'm the bridge, the translator. They've been here for so long, waiting for someone who could understand them, who could help them communicate with our world." The sheriff raises his gun, pointing it at the nearest shadow figure. Ethan's expression changes to one of alarm. "No, don't hurt them. They don't understand violence, don't understand fear the way we do. They only want to learn, to share knowledge." What happens next, neither John nor Sheriff Carson can fully articulate. The shadow figures move not toward them, but around them, through them. Images flood their minds, visions of stars, of worlds beyond Earth, of civilizations rising and falling across millions of years. Knowledge, vast and incomprehensible, pours into human minds never designed to contain it. "I saw everything," Sheriff Carson would say years later, his voice distant, his eyes unfocused, as if still seeing those visions. The beginning of the universe, the end of it, all time laid out like a map. And us, humans, just a small part of something so much larger, so much stranger. When they regain their senses, the chamber is empty. The shadow figures are gone, and so is Ethan. The search for Ethan Keller begins again, this time with state police, FBI agents, and search and rescue teams from across California. The mine is explored inch by inch. The forest is combed by hundreds of volunteers. But the vast chamber John and Sheriff Carson described cannot be found. The tunnels are, as they were during the original search, narrow and collapsed in places, with no sign of the cathedral-like space or the beings that inhabited it. "We found no physical evidence to support Mr. Keller's or Sheriff Carson's account," FBI agent Reynolds states in his official report. "The chamber they described simply doesn't exist. Our working theory is that both men experienced a form of shared hallucination, possibly caused by oxygen deprivation or naturally occurring gases in the mine." Sarah refuses to leave Pine Rest without her son. John, changed by what he experienced in the mine, becomes obsessed with researching similar incidents around the world. Cases of missing persons who returned, changed, who spoke of beings from elsewhere, of knowledge beyond human understanding. Sheriff Carson resigns from his position 3 months after Ethan's second disappearance. He moves to a small cabin outside of town, becoming increasingly reclusive. Those who see him note that his hair has turned completely white, though he's only 43. April 20th, 1993. Sarah Keller is at home, going through Ethan's belongings, a ritual she performs every few days. She finds a drawing she hasn't seen before, hidden under Ethan's mattress. It shows the shadow figures gathered around a small human form. At the bottom, in Ethan's careful handwriting, are the words, "Not goodbye, just see you later." As Sarah stares at the drawing, the temperature in the room drops suddenly. Frost forms on the window, and shadows begin to move across the walls. October 21st, 1993. Exactly 1 year after Ethan was first found in the mine, a hiker in the forests above Pine Rest sees something moving among the trees. Not an animal, not quite human either. He raises his camera, manages to snap a single photograph before whatever it is disappears. The photograph, blurry and underexposed, shows what appears to be a child standing between 2 tall, impossibly thin figures. The child is looking directly at the camera, smiling. Though the image is unclear, those who knew him say the smile belongs to Ethan Keller. The story of Ethan Keller becomes a legend in Sierra County. Parents warn their children to stay away from the old mine, from the deep woods. Occasional sightings are reported. A boy accompanied by tall shadows, always at a distance, always disappearing when approached. In 1997, a geology student from UC Berkeley researching the unique mineral formations in the area, disappears for 3 days. When found, she speaks of underground chambers where they study us as we study them. She leaves academia and spends the rest of her life creating intricate artwork depicting beings of shadow and light. In 2001, the entrance to the Pine Rest mine is destroyed in a controlled demolition, ostensibly for safety reasons. The night before the demolition, multiple residents report seeing lights moving around the mine entrance, and then, nothing.
Through the forest, toward the mountain, dozens of tall, thin figures, and among them, a teenage boy. Sarah Keller still lives in Pine Rest. She never left, never stopped waiting for her son to return. John moved away in 1995, unable to live with the constant reminder of what they had lost, what they had found and lost again. "People think I'm crazy for staying," Sarah says, her voice old or narrow, weathered by grief and hope. "For believing, but I know what John saw in that mine. I know what I've seen since, the shadows, the signs. Ethan is alive, different, changed, but alive. And sometimes on cold nights, when the wind blows just right, I can hear him whispering to me, telling me stories about the stars." Sheriff Carson, now living under a different name in a different state, agrees to a rare interview in 2005. His hair is white, his face deeply lined, his eyes holding a knowledge that sits uneasily on his shoulders. "There are things in this world, below it, beyond it, that we're not meant to understand," he says, staring not at the interviewer, but at something distant, invisible. "The boy, Ethan, he was special. He could understand them, communicate with them. Whatever they are, wherever they come from, they chose him for a reason. And sometimes I think they're still out there, still watching, still learning about us as we remain ignorant of them." October 21st, 2022. Exactly 30 years to the day since Ethan Keller was found alive after 13 days buried in the collapsed mine. A documentary crew is filming in Pine Rest, interviewing locals about the legend, about the occasional sightings that continue to this day. As they set up their equipment near the sealed mine entrance, their electronic devices malfunction simultaneously. Batteries drain, cameras shut off, and microphones pick up only static. And recorded on a single frame of damaged footage is a young man who would now be 40 years old, standing at the tree line. Behind him, stretching into the forest, are tall, thin shadows. The young man is smiling, raising his hand in what might be a greeting or a warning. "We couldn't explain it," the documentarian later tells colleagues. "None of our equipment should have failed like that. We have backups, redundancies. And that single frame, our tech experts insist it wasn't doctored, wasn't a double exposure. Whatever we captured on film was really there for just a split second." The mystery of Ethan Keller, how he survived 13 days buried in a mine, where he went when he disappeared again, what he became, remains unsolved. But in Pine Rest, they tell his story on dark nights, around campfires, in hushed voices. They say if you go into the forest alone, if you find the right place where the boundary between worlds is thin, you might see shadows moving among the trees. You might hear whispers in a language no human throat could produce. And you might glimpse a boy, or a man now, with eyes that have seen beyond our world, who walks between shadow and light, between what we know and what we fear to know. In the end, perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some boundaries meant to remain uncrossed. But the mountains of Sierra County stand silent, ancient, watching, and within their depths, something watches back. The wind whistles through the pines. The rugged landscape is now bathed in twilight, And somewhere just at the edge of perception, shadows move against the gathering darkness. But the story doesn't end there. Not all tales conclude with neat resolutions. And the mystery of what happened in Pine Rest continues to ripple outward, touching lives far beyond the small mountain town. In 2023, Dr. Maya Chen, a neuropsychiatrist specializing in trauma and memory disorders, stumbles across the Keller case while researching a paper on shared psychosis. Initially dismissive of the fantastical elements, she becomes increasingly intrigued by the consistency of the accounts, not just from John Keller and Sheriff Carson, but from others who claimed encounters with the strange entities in the decades since. What fascinates me is the neurological similarity in their descriptions, Dr. Chen explains to colleagues at a conference in Berkeley. Different witnesses, separated by years, with no connection to each other, all describe identical sensory experiences. The cold, the humming vibration, the feeling of time distortion. From a scientific perspective, this consistency is troubling. She travels to Pine Rest, now a slightly larger town than it was in 1992, though still remote, still shadowed by the mountains. The old mine entrance has long been sealed, covered over with concrete and warning signs, but locals still avoid the area, especially at night. Dr. Chen meets with Sarah Keller, now in her 70s, still living in the same house on Oakwood Lane. Her hair has gone silver, her face lined with age, but her eyes remain sharp, observant, haunted by a knowledge she struggles to articulate. "They still come," Sarah tells Dr. Chen as they sit on the porch looking toward the mountains. "Not as often as they used to, but they come. I feel the cold first, then see the shadows moving across the walls. Sometimes they bring messages." "Messages from whom?" Dr. Chen asks, careful to keep her tone neutral, clinical. "From Ethan. He's not the same anymore. Not exactly human, not exactly them, but he remembers being my son. He wants me to know he's all right." Dr. Chen is skeptical, of course, but her skepticism wavers when Sarah shows her a collection of objects. The strange artifacts Ethan had collected as a child, and others that have appeared in the house over the years. Metallic objects with impossible geometries, stones with patterns that shift when not observed directly, wood twisted into shapes that defy the laws of physics. "I've had physicists look at these," Sarah says, handling the objects with reverence. "They can't explain them. The metal isn't any element found on Earth. The patterns in the stone don't match any known mathematical sequence. One professor from MIT said the wood appears to exist partially in dimensions beyond our perception." That night, staying in Pine Rest's only motel, Dr. Chen experiences something that challenges her rational worldview. At precisely 2:37 a.m., she wakes to find her room unnaturally cold. Frost forms on the inside of the window. Shadows move across the wall, not the familiar shadows cast by trees or passing cars, but shapes that seem to move with purpose, with intelligence. And for 13 minutes, she times it on her watch, she feels a presence in the room. Not threatening, but alien. Curious, studying her as she studies it. When it passes, she finds a small object on her bedside table. A piece of what looks like obsidian, carved into a spiral shape that seems to continue inward forever, impossible to fully track with the human eye. Dr. Chen cuts her visit short, returns to Berkeley, and tries to dismiss the experience as a vivid dream, a product of suggestion after immersing herself in the Keller case. But the object remains, defying analysis by university equipment, its very existence a challenge to her understanding of reality. Meanwhile, in the forests above Pine Rest, hikers occasionally report strange encounters, glimpses of a man who appears and disappears among the trees, always accompanied by tall, thin shadows. Park rangers log the reports, but investigate half-heartedly, familiar with the local legend and assuming the sightings are products of imagination, of the town's collective mythology. But in July 2024, a group of campers vanishes from a site near the old mine. 5 people, 3 men, 2 women, all experienced outdoors enthusiasts, disappear without a trace. Their campsite is found undisturbed, meals half-eaten, no signs of struggle or wildlife attack. The only unusual element, their electronic devices, phones, GPS units, cameras, all drained of power despite being fully charged the previous evening. The search stretches on for weeks. Helicopters with thermal imaging, tracking dogs, and hundreds of volunteers all find nothing. The case draws national attention briefly, then fades as the media moves on to newer tragedies, fresher mysteries. And then, 13 days later, they return. Not from the forest, not from the sealed mine entrance, but walking into town from the direction of the mountains, appearing suddenly on the main street as if they'd stepped through an invisible door. They are physically unharmed, but profoundly changed. Like Ethan 30 decades earlier, they show no signs of dehydration or malnutrition. Like Ethan, they speak of the Watchers, the tall, thin figures that exist in the spaces between our reality and others. Like Ethan, they describe experiences that defy rational explanation. Journeys through time and space, visions of civilizations beyond human comprehension. "They've been here longer than us," says Michael Delaney, one of the returned campers, his eyes distant, unfocused, as if seeing something beyond the hospital room where he's being interviewed. "Since before humans walked upright. They don't live in our world, not exactly. They live adjacent to it, in the thin places where realities overlap." The campers' return reignites interest in the Keller case. Journalists dig through archives, interview aging residents who remember the original incident. Someone tracks down John Keller, now living in Montana, a retired scientist who refuses to speak about his son, about what he saw in the mine that night in 1993. Dr. Chen returns to Pine Rest, drawn by the parallels between the new disappearances and the Keller case. She interviews the returned campers, compares their accounts with the historical record, and finds the similarities too precise to be coincidence or suggestion. Whatever happened to these people, whatever they experienced, it's the same phenomenon that affected Ethan Keller. And if their accounts are to be believed, and I find no rational reason to dismiss them, then there is something in those mountains that defies our current understanding of reality. The campers, unlike Ethan, do not disappear again. They return to their lives, changed but present, carrying the knowledge of what they experienced, of what exists beyond the boundaries of human perception. Some struggle with the burden of that knowledge, seeking therapy, medication, and ways to forget. Others embrace it, forming a loose community of experiencers who gather periodically in Pine Rest, sharing their stories, their understanding of the entities they call the Watchers. Sarah Keller joins these gatherings occasionally, an elder figure whose decades of contact with the phenomena give her a perspective the others lack. They're not gods, they're not demons or aliens, at least not in the way we understand those concepts. They're older than those ideas, more fundamental. They exist in the spaces between what we can perceive and what we can't, watching, learning, occasionally reaching through when they find someone who can see them. Like Ethan, someone says. Sarah nods, a sad smile touching her lips. Like Ethan, my son was special, sensitive to things most people can't perceive. The Watchers recognized that in him, were drawn to it. They saved him in the mine, kept him alive when he should have died, and eventually they took him to be with them. Not against his will. He chose to go. In December 2024, Sarah Keller passes away peacefully in her sleep. The house on Oakwood Lane stands empty for months. No relatives come forward to claim it. No will is found among her possessions. The strange artifacts she collected disappear, not stolen, but simply gone when the realtor comes to prepare the property for sale. The night of her funeral, residents across Pinecrest report unusual phenomena: lights moving through the forest toward the mountain, cold spots in homes, and shadows that move independent of any light source. And multiple witnesses describe seeing a man walking through town in the pre-dawn hours, his features indistinct in the darkness, but his presence somehow familiar. Walking beside him, around him, through him, are tall, thin figures that seem made of shadow and light simultaneously. The man stops at the cemetery, stands before a fresh grave, then turns towards the mountains. Those brave enough to watch see him raise a hand in farewell, or perhaps in greeting, before he and his strange companions fade from view, leaving only the morning mist and the distant cry of birds. The story of Ethan Keller, of the Watchers, of the mysteries beneath the mountain, continues to be told in Pinecrest. It changes with each telling, grows, evolves, as all legends do. Some dismiss it as fantasy, as the product of isolated minds creating meaning from coincidence and tragedy. Others believe every word, watch the shadows with wary eyes, and avoid the forests after dark. The truth perhaps lies somewhere between, in the thin places where our reality meets others, where entities older than humanity observe us as we observe ants, curious about our brief, bright lives, our limited perceptions, our desperate attempts to understand a universe far stranger than we can comprehend. And so, the file is closed. But tell me, would you dare to uncover the rest?